Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this video, and this is part 2 of the Treat Farm Trail workshop that I did back in Sleeping Bear. And these are the photos that I forgot to put in the last video, the photos from the workshop at night, and the thought processes and techniques behind these images. So thanks for checking out this video, and I hope you enjoy. We begin with these 3 shots that were in the previous video. The technique used is called exposure bracketing, or HDR. That stands for high dynamic range. As explained in other videos, you take one dark image, one normal image, and one bright image and merge them together to create an HDR image. These next 2 shots of the barn house are also HDR images. I don't recall if I had HDR set to auto or if it was the +or-2 exposure on my camera. That's typically what I use. To show you the range of photos, here is the dark one, here is the normal one, and here is the bright one. This is the merged and edited shot of the 3 shots I just showed you. For these, I switched back to the 28mm lens and captured this shot as well as using the same HDR technique. Although I liked the hazy sky in these photos, I thought it would look even better with some clouds, so I used the sky replacement tool in Photoshop to change the sky in both images. Here is the result of these 2 images. Next, going down to the meadow, I took a focus stacked image of the field, ensuring that everything would be nice and sharp from front to back. Similar to HDR, a focus stacked image is multiple images stacked together, but each image is focused throughout different points of the image from front to back. You'll select all your images in Lightroom and select Edit in Photoshop as layers. Once all layers are added into Photoshop, you'll select each layer so all the layers are highlighted, and at the top you'll click Edit, Auto Align Layers. That should auto-align all the images to the best of its ability, and then you'll click Edit again, Auto Blend Layers. That will blend all the layers into one image for a nice, super sharp image, and you hope that Auto did a good job. Just make sure you pixel peep and check for any weird errors. If the conditions are very windy and there's a lot of movement, I recommend shooting at a very closed aperture, a few clicks from your highest available, such as like f13 on an f16 lens, or maybe f11, just something really nice and sharp. Like the barn image, I added the sky replacement to this version as well, and this is that which you see here. Which one do you guys like more, the sky replacement or the hazy version? You saw these next 2 shots at the end of the previous video with the tree. I also used HDR imaging for these 2 shots as well. The workshop began around 9 p.m. when we arrived back here with the group and took some simple blue hour shots of the barn house, hoping to use them to blend with our Milky Way photos later. Funny enough, this shot, I think I had a hair on my lens that you can see here in the sky. Blue hour is a time period briefly after sunset where everything has a nice shade of blue to it. We moved over to the Lake Michigan lookout for some twilight shots of the moon, which we really enjoyed. I had my 75 to 300mm out the majority of the time, taking a few images here and there. This first image here is the single shot of the moon at 1 second ISO 3200, so there was a bit of noise that was reduced with denoise in Lightroom. The next is a long exposure moon trail of only 2 minutes long, but with a very low ISO. The intent was to capture the long exposure for better color, lower noise, and Photoshop out the moon and stars later, while bringing the moon in from the first 1 second picture. This is that shot here. I played around with the different blending options and found with the pin light option and reversing the layers, I could get the nice glowing portion of the moon. This is the result of that experiment. I zoomed way into the moon to get some nice details and experimented with the color balance. This orange moon was what we were seeing with our eyes, and this white moon is normally what you would traditionally think of the moon. This shot here is one of my favorites from the workshop. Doing a single exposure moon trail image. I calculated that the moon would set around 11:36, so I set the camera timer to bulb mode and the aperture to f16 in ISO 100. I set a phone timer for 30 minutes. I found that these settings would give me a good exposure by using PhotoPill's exposure calculator. The moon had set early behind some clouds, and after about 19 minutes, I ended the bulb timer. This is the result of that shot. It's a bit underexposed because it's not the full 30 minutes like I thought, and also because the moon set early behind the clouds, it resulted in a lot less light being captured as well, but I absolutely love the way that the shot came out. We did a quick lesson on late season panoramas, but I myself did not partake in any of those photos. After that, we moved back over to the barn house and started to set up there. I got out the Rokinon 50mm 1.5 Cine lens that I rented out on a whim from the local camera store and took these two portraits. The first portrait, we used her headlamp to kind of light up and set the scene, and the second portrait, we used my trigger flash. And I'm pleasantly surprised with just how well this lens performed. Both shots were ISO 12,800, 5 seconds, and f2. I switched my lens to the 14mm Sigma 1.8 and began taking 12 images at ISO 12,800, f2.5, and 15 seconds. It was incredibly dark and the foreground was still pretty underexposed even at that ISO. I knew I was going to stack these images later in Sequitur to help reduce the noise, and I wanted to ensure a good foreground exposure just in case the blue hour foreground didn't work out. So I took this image at ISO 1600, f1.8, in 3 minutes for the foreground, just in case. Check out the fog in the meadow behind the house. After stacking the Milky Way shots and editing it, I blended in the long exposure foreground in with the sky, and this is the result of that blend. I'm so happy with the way that this came out. It looks awesome. This next one is the blue hour blend from the foreground. Both are incredibly similar, but the main difference is the slight crop and the lack of fog in the background. We swapped spots so everybody could get their shots, and I set up this time lapse while I took one of the guests back to her car. I took 26 sequential shots from the time lapse, no particular reason for choosing 26, and stacked them in Sequitur to reduce noise. This is the edited stacked version. I love the detail in the Milky Way, but the barn is too dark for my liking, and unfortunately the foreground is just too underexposed. Luckily, I took a blue hour shot, so I tried blending those. It wasn't the exact spot, so I had to use the new Photoshop Beta remove tool to remove the tree in the stacked photo. And unfortunately, when doing that, it created some inaccurate dust lanes in the core, but the blue hour blend looks much better in my opinion. We moved to the back side of the barn to take some photos of the northern portion of the Milky Way. I set up my star tracker quickly and showed how the star tracker works. I shot the sky at ISO 1600, 2 minutes, and f2.5 with the 14mm. For the foreground, I simply turned off the tracker and used the exact same settings. Although, I did turn on my LED light panel to light up the entire scene for a few seconds, and it worked great. Blending those two images together and editing resulted in this image here. To our dismay, we noticed clouds coming in from the southwest. Next, we walked back to the beach overlook to retrieve the camera that we left for star trails. I'm excited to see what my student will come up with. Upon getting the camera, a bunch of dew had sadly formed over the lens, surely ruining some shots, but many were still good. And checking the image review, we managed to capture some aurora as well. The Milky Way was fairly late in the night and it was actually lining up nicely with the window off of the cliff. It's too bad that horrible clouds were there. I took 12 images to stack using ISO 12,800, 20 seconds, f2.5 with the 14mm, but one of them was not usable from the headlamps turning on. I opted to take a long exposure foreground of ISO 1600, 3 minutes, f2.5. Combining the two and editing them resulted in this image here. I moved to the side lookout where I had a perfect window of the Milky Way over the cloud above the lake. I took 10 shots to stack in no long foreground exposure. This is the result of that stacked image. Lastly, I decided to get the 50mm lens back out that I rented since I wasn't able to use it much. We had talked about doing vertical panoramas because the arches are so high up in the sky. I took 4 tracked shots of the sky, each moving downwards after each photo at 45 seconds, ISO 1600 f2. The shots were merged in PT GUI and edited in Lightroom and Photoshop moving forward. I'm extremely impressed with how cheap this lens is and how well it performed. And that's pretty much it. And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for checking out the video, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and feel free to leave your thoughts on any of the images, which one's your favorite, kind of stuff like that. I'd appreciate a follow on social medias, JM Naturescapes on pretty much every platform. But thanks again for tuning into this, and I really appreciate your support. Thanks so much.